So let's pick up where we left off. And a lot of this is review, but it really an expansion on the previous tshuva, right? So we saw this idea that Rav Sharaga brings down from the Shulchan Aruch, that when a person, let's say I exploit you by selling you something that I shouldn't have, but it only for consumption, but it only involves an Isser D'Rabbanan. There's never a penalty to make me pay for that as long as you benefited, because the rabbis view it from a financial standpoint. The rabbis view it as if you ate kosher. Okay? Because when they say don't eat that food, they only mean that there's a rabbinic ban on eating it, but there are no financial repercussions on eating something that's only rabbinically non-kosher, which is a huge chiddush. It's a huge that's a huge novelty. So, because a lot of times, the law does take into consideration mental anguish to penalize someone for causing mental anguish. And here, there doesn't seem to be any mental anguish involved. I ate something that goes against everything that I believe in. It's such an important value to me, but we don't care how important of a value it is to you. Let's say to have Chalav Yisrael, or to have the Shemitah produce not be heter mechira, et cetera, right? If it's kosher and it's only banned midrabanan, right? It's only rabbinically non-kosher, but it's not biblically non-kosher. The seller cannot be assessed financially. That seems to be the Shulchan Aruch's position, and this is where that's the point where we're up to in Rav Sharaga's tshuva. L'chatchila, it's usher to sell it, right? But after consumption, right? So if it's before the guy ate it, he's entitled to a full refund. Okay, right? But once the food has been consumed, there is no recourse for the buyer against the seller. That seems to be the Shulchan Aruch's position, even when the person paid a higher price for getting kosher food, which doesn't seem to be fair. Doesn't at all seem to be fair. Okay, I think there's this cry for justice here. Yeah. Yeah, especially if he knows he's doing it. I guess maybe the argument would be is that he'll feel the consequences on Yelp. When yeah, but what did people do before the days of Yelp? Yeah, because nowadays, if a person is wronged in a restaurant or in a food place, they're toast. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So anyway, so let's see where he goes with this. So uvishut chasam sofer heir dema inyan zeh shechachamim lo ratzu lahafsid mamon. So the Chasam Sofer asks a very simple question on what the Shulchan Aruch says. When it comes to an Isser D'Rabbanan, the rabbis didn't want a seller to lose money, right? Because he's losing money. Valo kama mamon mafsidim al yidei Isser Mechshashos D'Rabbanan, the kama behemos nechalos l'klavim ayin sham. He says, what is that supposed to mean? There are plenty of times where the rabbis tell you you're going to have to lose money because you violated a rabbinic prohibition, including kashrus. So, for example, there are certain times when a slaughterhouse, the standards of the shechita are that it's kosher midoraisa, but not kosher midorabbanan, and the rabbis still make you throw the meat away. So, how can you say that? Like your butter crusted chicken, you got to throw it away. You got to kosher your pots. There's expense involved. So, just because it's an isser d'Rabbanan, that doesn't mean that they don't take money into consideration. Yeah, you have to lose money sometimes, even when you violate a rabbinic isser. Uvenasivas hamishpat bier de ha'oiver al isser Torah afilu b'shogeg tarach kapara u'tshuva lahagein min ha'yisurim. So the Nesivos, one of the preeminent commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, especially on Choshen Mishpat issues, so he writes that when you violate a biblical law with consuming something that's biblically asur, so then you need a kapara, you need an atonement to remove any kind of punishment that'll involve pain coming from heaven. Aval be'isr derabanan, ein tzarich shum kapara, v'chi'ilu lo avar dami. But when you violate only an isr derabanan, it's wrong, and Hashem's not happy that you violated an isr derabanan, but the painful repercussions will not come from heaven, which is a very astounding statement, because we're normally used to hearing from, especially the many quotes from the Talmud, that anytime a Jew violates an Isser D'Rabbanan, he's really violating a biblical Isser, because the Torah says, Lo Tasur, you're not allowed to deviate from what the rabbis tell you. And if you do, so really you are invoking divine retribution. But the Nesiba says, nah, there's a difference. When you eat something non-kosher, oh man, it's almost like you've taken poison in. But when you eat an Isser D'Rabbanan, you're not allowed to eat it, but there's nothing spiritually poison in that food. That's the way he views it. And therefore, Vavi Ki'ilu Achol Davar Kasher, V'harei Nehnek Kemo Meha Kasher, Lochein Lo Yachzer Lo Adamim. And since, therefore, you benefited from it, there are no negative spiritual repercussions to the eating of something that's only rabbinically prohibited. And that's why the seller is not obligated to refund you anything, because you got what you paid for. You got good food, tasted good, it filled your belly, and therefore you don't return anything back. The seller doesn't return anything back to the buyer. Yeah, there's no mental anguish, no worries. You're okay. You didn't eat anything that was so terrible. You shouldn't want to regurgitate. Omnam rova poskim cholkim al hanesivus. Besovrim degam b'isudrabanan sarich kapara. But most of the poskim disagree with the nesivus. They say no. When you violate an isur derabanan through consumption, you do need a kapara. V'imkein adayin kashet. And therefore, it's still difficult to understand. Amai kasach maran b'mocher isur derabanan de'ein machzir lo klum. So why then, according to most of these poskim, like who don't hold like this in the Nesivas, that the seller doesn't have to return anything. There is damage, there is spiritual damage, and there is a need for atonement, even when you ingest a rabbinic prohibition. V'ra'isi lipri chadash, shekasav de'ein l'dayik bazek midivrei marin shekasav de'ein machzir lo klum, de be'emes pater milashalim es ha'hefresh kamo shekasav hashach. So the Pri Chadash actually disagrees with the Shach. The Shach holds that even if there's a differential between the kosher and the non-kosher, the seller does not have to pay that back. But the Pri Chadash disagrees. He says, no. He says the Elad Shulchan Aruch Mari B'Davar She'isr V'Eter Shavim Kegon Gvinas Ha'akum Shasuras B'Divrei Sofrim Gvinas Yisrael Shein Ba'oso HaMechir. He says the Shulchan Aruch is talking about a scenario where the thing that makes this thing non-kosher biblically does not in any way elevate the price of the commodity, such as a wheel of cheese. Like in the old days, the wheel of cheese of a Jew that was processed by a Jew versus the wheel of cheese that was processed by a goy is exactly the same. Same ingredients, same process, absolutely indistinguishable from each other. And the only difference was that one is that a Jew was involved in the processing of it, and the other one, it was made by a Gentile. So on the marketplace, there's really no difference between the two. And like we were just talking about Florida, the restaurants in Miami, they appeal to Jews and non-Jews equally, right? There are many places like that where, I was just reading my old stomping grounds in San Diego, California. There's a new pizza place that people are raving about because it's got good food, and it's very hard to find good kosher food in San Diego. But the truth is, the only way you can survive in a place like that is if you appeal to the non-Jews as well, right? So there's no difference in the price. So I ended up giving you, let's say, oh, I don't know. Maybe I accidentally put non-kosher cheese on the pizza. But non-kosher cheese, like the conservative movement says even today, that many Jews today will go to Pizza and their rabbis will say it's okay because non-kosher cheese is only usher midrabanan. Were you aware of this? That the conservative, some rabbis in the reforming conservative will say you're still holding kosher if you buy non-kosher cheese. You know, okay, as long as you don't get the pepperoni, you just take off your glasses and it's kosher, right? No, but the thing is that putting aside the pepperoni, the isser on the cheese is a rabbinic isser because it's and this is and you can make the argument that even when the rennet is from an animal product, it is so there are many the Shulchan Aruch itself says that animal rennet is still kosher even when it comes from a non-kosher animal because the rennet is processed so much and it comes from the stomach lining so that by the time it's added to the curds it is inedible on its own and it's just an agent to create the curdling process. Okay.
Like if you plan to have a wedding, like to the cake and said, I want to have this specific food, that was agreement.
Exactly.
And he didn't do it.
Right.
Now you've got a
Right.
contract.
And right. So there's a broken contract. But remember, there is a principle, and your question is very valid. There is a principle in Jewish law, and it's called hezek she'eino nikar. In other words, which literally means unrecognizable damage. So I have created a situation where you get exactly the product that you ordered, but instead of there being a physical, tangible problem with it, there is a religious problem with it that is not recognizable on a physical plane. So in many instances, the rabbis say that that's not actionable financially because there's no physical manifestation of that. Now, we're not talking about the heavenly retribution that is due to a person who willfully violates a person's religious wishes. But again, we're dealing with the financial issue. So I just want to clarify. We're in the middle of where the Pri Chadash says that you do have to pay the price differential. If a person provided you with something that on the open market would cost less because it has a high, let's say it's Chalav Yisrael, for example, which always costs more. Chalav Yisrael cheese, Chalav Yisrael milk, you're paying a premium, and he presents you with a product that is Chalav Akum. It may be kosher, midioraisa, it's still cow's milk, but uh, it's much less money. Aval betrefius machmas ister sheyesh hefresh gadol b'mechir ben kosher l'treif, adavar barur shemenakalo hadamim v'chayv hamocher lahatzer hefresh. So therefore, the Pri Chadash's conclusion is when there is a price differential, absolutely, the seller is required to pay back the difference in price. Because the guy said, in the situation, the case that we're raising, the guy is paying extra for the produce from Chutz La'aretz. He doesn't want to have to deal with Heter Mechira. V'chein kasav hamachane Ephraim de'eno mishalim elamasha hochel shaveh. Again, going back to the contractual obligation, I wanted produce from Jordan. You gave me produce from Eretz Yisrael, and so therefore you were in violation of a contract, and therefore I, as the seller, have to return whatever the price differential is. Omnam, Amachne Ephraim Hebi Shameh Hatosus B'Ksuvus Mashma K'divrei Hashach. The B'Gemara Sham Gabe Zar Sha'achal Truma de la Abaya Potter. So there is, however, a Tosfos who seems to imply, like the Shach, that even when there is a price differential, as long as the person benefited physically from the item, the seller doesn't have to refund any money. because it says that there's a Tosfos that in Ksuvas that says that discussing the Gemara over there discusses the following: a non-Kohen eats truma, and he eats truma. I guess eats it accidentally, and the Abaya says that the person who gave him truma, and I guess misrepresented it as chulin, and fed it to a Yisrael. And I think the case over there is a guy sells me a bag of apples under the pretense that it's just regular apples. And it turns out that they're truma apples that only a Kohen is allowed to eat. A Yisrael who eats it is violating the Torah. And according to Abaya, the seller is not obligated to make any restitution to the buyer. V'hemida hagemara kagon shetochav lo chaveru bebeis habliya umatzi lahadure al yedei hadachat. So why is the seller going to be exempt? The answer is that his friend stuck it in his throat so that he wasn't really eating it in a normative way. V'hemidu atoisvus demayri demi lo hava ba'oichel ki im shava pruta umat yoser uv'sha'a shetochav lo lebeis habliya niskalkala hatruma ktsas ve'eno shava pruta. The Tosfos explains that at the time when the guy swallowed it, this little piece of apple was not worth a pruta, and so therefore there was no financial loss of a pruta or more that the person who sold the apples caused. Vafilu yimnomar zenene v'zelo chaser pater mikol makom kevin deshavin kol shehu mischayev bekol u'mishalim kol mashenehene harei mashma lahedja miatos v'shafal pi shochel hayeshava rak pruta b'kol makom mishalim kol mashenehene v'imkein gam kan shekana oichel treif b'chash b'shu kasher v'achlo tzarech l'shalim kol shavi k'mo shekasav hashav. So it seems from that discussion over there that the person benefited from that piece of apple, and so therefore he's not entitled to a refund. And the same thing would be true over here as well. As long as, in other words, the case over there is the guy who swallowed the piece of apple, if it was from truma, it would be worth less because truma is not as marketable as regular produce because it has a more limited market. It can only be sold to Kohanim. But in any event, so Omnam Hamachni Ephraim Doches Araya, the Hasam Niskabin Lehenos Meosa Achila, Aval Hacha Anan Sahari Di Elohai Yodei Elohai Yakona Esa Iser. And the Machni Ephraim says that case is not comparable over there, because in that case in the Gemara, we see that the person is desirous of benefiting from the food, but here it's clear that if the person would have known that he's being given the wrong kind of produce, he never would have purchased it. And in our case over here, the consumer is quite upset, and he's quite upset that he ended up eating it and feeding it to his guests. Bottom line is that the Pri Chadash and the Machnei Ephraim and the Shulchan Gavo, which is another commentary, they are all of the opinion that when there is a price differential between the kosher and the non-kosher, the seller has to at least make up the difference. Omnam hapritar dacha divrei Pri Chadash b'iskum divrei hashachta b'chol gavnei namocher matzlo as ha'hefresh. However, there are other poskim who side with the shach. V'chein kasav bagos kisei kasa daharsana. Al shut b'samim rosh afal gav the mistaver kapri chadash mikol makom miloshin harambam mashulchan aruch the kos v'dein mokom machzor lo klum mashma shein machzor lo klum. Just basically, he's lining up two different sets of poskim. One set of poskim say that when there is a price differential between the kosher and the non-kosher, or between the heter mechira produce and the chutz la'aretz produce, then you have to refund the difference. And there's a whole line of poskim who say you don't have to give them back anything. The Yisera Mizukas of Bishara Mishpat, the Malokech Bar Acheles Aochel Ha'aser Chayev L'Shalem L'Mocher Afilu Imalokech Adain Muchzak Bekasbo. And the Shar HaMishpat goes even further. And he says that if the consumer ate the item, even though he hasn't paid for it, and then it's discovered that this item was a non-kosher midrabanan, he still has to pay full price to the seller, even though he's quite upset. And even though he can argue, but you fed me non-kosher food. Kevin shekvar nischayv beis hakaniya v'harei dome lahadei biksuvas kasav la'oin michayv l'chamisha slaim chayv litin l'chamisha slaim ubeno eno padoi. He says that this is no different, from when you have the Gemara in Ksuva says, a man goes over to a Kohen and he says, I owe you 5 shekels. And then he has a son, gives him an IOU for 5 shekels. And then he has a son, and the son needs a pidyon haben. So he has to give the Kohen 5 shekels, and the son needs to give an extra 5 shekels for the son's pidyon haben. Because once a debt is generated, you cannot remove the debt by killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So the argument being is that once I took the food off the counter as a consumer to eat it myself, you sold me a slice of pizza, I took it off the counter, I brought it to my table, even if I haven't eaten it yet, even if I haven't paid for it yet, once I take it from you, I've created an implicit contract that I owe you money, and I owe you a certain amount of money. The rabbis said that you cannot do a pidyon haben with an IOU. Mikol makom kevin shemei haTorah beno podui keshiyitein chala chiyuv alav u'mechuyev litein kevin shemei dioraisa chiyuv ma'alyo v'imkein hu adin keshikvar ochal iser midirabanan arei nena mimenu kibaser kosher v'chayv lo kol adamim kevin shemin haTorah heter hu legamer. So therefore, from a financial standpoint, since as soon as I take the money, take the food, I have generated a contractual debt that I owe you money for this, even though it turns out to be an Isser D'Rabbanan, that debt has not been removed. Asher al kain b'nidon didon. So therefore, to conclude for our case, Pashut shebal ha'ulam yachol liton kimli ki'avshach siyato she'enu chayv la'achzer lo klum v'afilu et ha'hefresh bein shivu yirakot shel yivul nachri le'eter mechira enu chayv la'achzer. He says, from the standpoint of the hotel manager who organized the meal, or the caterer who organized the meal, and said that he would give the chutz la'aretz produce, okay, and would not rely on heter mechira for the meals, and he ended up by accident using heter mechira produce. He could say, once the guy has already paid, he can say, I'm sorry, I paskin like the shach, that I don't have to return any of your money. However, the imbal hasimcha adayin lo shileim al hamanot yacholiton kimli kepri chadashu pater mehatosefetz. But if the Baal Simcha hasn't yet paid, or he's only paid partial payment, he can say, I'm sorry, I'm not paying you for the extra amount that you charged me for the special Yavul Nachri, the produce from Chutz La'aretz, because I hold like the Pri Chadash. Uli inyan mashatoim Baal Simcha shenigram lo agmas nefesh v'toveya pitzuyim avor zeh. What about the pain and suffering that the Baal Simcha is claiming? So Pashut she'en lachayiv et Baal ha'ulam al zeh. It seems fairly obvious that you cannot obligate the caterer to pay for his pain and suffering. The kevin shabal ha'ulam kvar kibal alatzmo l'shalim es ha'hefrosh. But now the case that was presented to me is that the caterer promised to pay back the difference between the cost. Because remember, he said it's going to be an extra 10 shekel per meal. So he's promising to pay that extra 10 shekel per meal. So for 500 people, so he's going to have to pay back 5,000 shekel. So he's already committed to that. According to what Rav Shirag had written, if the guy already paid, Me'ikar hadin, he wouldn't be obligated. He could say, I paskin like the shach. But lefachot yasekain, v'akol yavo al makomo b'shal. Let at least the caterer pay back the 5,000 shekel, and let's make shalom. The yakpid mikanu lahaba shalotetze takola machmas yado afilu b'shoge. And we have to give sort of like a stern warning to the caterer. You better be a good boy next time. In other words, don't make sure this never happens again. I'm still disturbed by the tshuva. We've seen an elaboration. We've seen the two sides that are lined up. And I have to tell you, I don't agree. I absolutely do not agree. When there's a special line item for the additional cost of this, I don't see how anyone can get away with that. And I think that the fundamental error, and I'm going to say something that is a little bit chutzpahdik, but I'm going to say that the fundamental error that I think that Rav Sharaga is making in his judgment is that a special added cost per meal was added in this scenario. And because of that, I don't see how anyone can say that the seller is not, the caterer is not obligated to return that added value, even if the guy has already paid. Now, Rav Sharaga is saying, he could say, well, I paskin like the shach, that whenever there's a price differential between kosher and non-kosher, the seller does not have to pay that difference. But here, there was implicit in the contract that the guy is dafka paying extra because of the added kashrus feature or chumrah or whatever you want to call it. And therefore, I cannot fathom how he can paskin that if the guy's already paid, there's no legal recourse. I don't agree with this tshuva. I think that there's a fundamental flaw in the logic here. I do understand that when a person pays for something under the pretense that it's kosher without any rabbinic bans or any relying or any leniencies, then according to the shach, even when there is a price differential, you cannot seek out a refund for the difference in a situation where you go into a kosher restaurant and it says Chalav Yisrael, and it turns out that the guy accidentally had a supply of kosher cheese that is non-Chalav Yisrael, like instead of getting the Ha'olam cheese, he got the Migdal cheese. Those are the different brands in the US. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know if they have that here. I think you can get it. Yeah. So Migdal is made by the same people who make Ha'olam. It is. I promise you. It's made by the same manufacturer. It's the exact same cheese, but one is with Chalav Yisrael and one is with not Chalav Yisrael. And so the Migdal has become less and less popular over the years. But when I was a kid in LA, many times all you could get was Migdal because they didn't ship Ha'olam to LA because it was too small of a market, the Chalav Yisrael market. Today, the world has changed. And it's almost all Chalav Yisrael, the cheese manufacturers. But there's still a few guys who say, I can save money by selling non-Chalav Yisrael, Chalav Stam cheese. And so there's still a small market for it. Guy gets a shipment in, and instead of Ha'olam, they sent him Migdal cheese. Guy buys a slice of pizza, finds out that it was not Chalav Yisrael. He says, I want a refund. No, I'm sorry. It was only at best an Isser de Rabbanan. And the cheese was 100% kosher under rabbinic supervision. And the problem is that they just got the milk from a dairy that's not Chalav Yisrael. You're not entitled to a refund, even of the difference in price between kosher cheese and Chalav Yisrael cheese and non-Chalav Yisrael cheese. That I get. That I understand, because there's no added line item. Like on the menu, it doesn't say slice of pizza for non-Chalav Yisrael cheese is $3, and the slice of pizza for Chalav Yisrael pizza is $4. There's no differentiation, but it just says pizza $4 a slice, and it's not because of the Chalav Yisrael that it's $4 a slice, but there's a lot of other things that are built into the costs of a slice of pizza, and therefore that's what you're paying. Yes, does the Does the Chalav Yisrael pizza store charge more? Yes, they do. But there's no line item that says that you're adding extra for that specific chumrah. So that's the part that I disagree with Rav Shiraga, and we should never know of these things in. Well, if they call me, I would advocate that the caterer has to pay back at least the price differential. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the reasonable expectation of the party.
All right, Chevra, we'll see you in a week. Okay, see you in